Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webcast on how to fund your women-owned startup. Today's webcast is sponsored by Michigan Economic Development Corporation and powered by Crane Content Studio. I'm Laura Katzar, today's moderator and Crane's webcast editor. Welcome. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. Today's webcast will be 60 minutes long with a Q&A portion that should take up about half the time. You can ask a question at any time by clicking on the questions on your control panel and typing it in. Any tech problems can be handled the same way. And finally, if you like what you hear today, this webcast will be available for replay and sharing. Look for a detailed email to follow. And now let's meet today's presenters. With us today, we will have Emily Hein, founder and managing director for EntryPoint, Kim Gamez, CEO and founder of Mi Padrino, Jessica Willis, founder and CEO of PocketNest, Monica Wheat, executive director and co-founder for Venture Catalyst, and Nadia Avanasser, federal and development projects director for the MEDC. And now it's time to talk about startup. So let's start with Emily. Emily is from EntryPoint. Hi, Emily. EntryPoint is a research organization that partners with different groups across the Midwest to better understand the entrepreneur ecosystem. Hello, Emily.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. And you have the fantastic job of setting the stage for us to better understand what Michigan is seeing with their women-led startups. So tell us what you see.
Yeah, get ready for the data. So EntryPoint partners with different organizations across the Midwest to deliver comprehensive research insights and implement data-driven programs to promote entrepreneurship. And one of the projects that we work on is we partner with the Michigan Venture Capital Association to do their annual research report on venture capital activity in Michigan. And you can access the full report on MVCA's website as well as on EntryPoint's website. And if you're an investor, the MVCA has like a ton of resources on their website as well. So what we found is that in Michigan in the last year, there was 71 startups that received just over $2 billion in venture capital investment. And of that, 146 million went to startups that were led by underrepresented groups. And of that $146 million, only 29 million was invested in female-led startups, and a lot of these were led by founders that are very well known across Michigan: Fifth Eye, Occupire, PocketNest, where Jessica's on this panel. Work It Health has been really great. We're funded in just the last year. And so overall, there are 144 venture-backed startup companies in Michigan broadly. So that was just what we just talked about, was just in this last year. So overall, there are actually quite a few more startups. So there's 144 venture-backed startups in Michigan, and 10% of Michigan venture-backed startups were led by a female CEO, and that's compared to just over 7% nationwide. So actually, Michigan is trending slightly higher than the national average, but is nowhere near representative population. So we still don't really consider that to be like a huge win. And you can see that on the startup side, you can see sort of like the trend line in the research of, you know, the number of women's startups, and it's actually been trending up for the last few years. And part of that, I think, is reflected in the venture capital community. When you see there are more venture capitalists that are in the region that are women, you find that there are more startups that are getting funded that are women, that are led by women. So 16% of venture capital professionals in Michigan are female, and that's compared to 21% of venture capital professionals nationwide. Again, not representative population. We're slightly behind, but that kind of fluctuates. Michigan has a slightly smaller entrepreneurial ecosystem than you might find on the coast. So I think that a fluctuation of just a few investors can actually make quite a bit of a difference. So some years we're ahead of the national average and some years we're behind. But I think overall, just talking about, you know, women being funded. I think venture capital is very much a relationship business. So, so finding a group of founders, and I found it like extremely helpful if I'm talking to founders about like advice, or, you know, like even down to what bank do you use, things like that, or like what tools are you using to manage your team. And it's really helpful just to talk to other founders. And then same goes for, there's a lot of groups that are focused on women founders. There's, you know, Detroit Women Leadership Network is a really great group to go in and find a bunch of local founders in Southeast Michigan. Same with Shine and Rise is a group in Ann Arbor that focuses on women in tech. And being able to bounce ideas off of people that are sort of in your same seat and are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with is extremely helpful. I would also say that just because venture capital is so relationship driven, if you're able to make a connection with a female venture capitalist and kind of even just from advice, they don't have to necessarily invest in your sector. But if you've identified that your company is a fit for angel or venture capital funding, talking to a female investor and kind of getting their guidance and who should you talk to and who's more friendly towards, you know, women founders, or who is a firm that invests in your company that they would recommend you talk to first, that kind of thing, I think is extremely important. And I would say overall, the venture capital community in Michigan does tend to be, there are quite a few investors invest in women-led companies, that's male or female-led venture firms, because diverse teams are more profitable. And that's something that investors really focus on the most, is like how well a company is doing. And so I would say that that really like navigating your way through a woman focus group would be kind of like my like go-to advice of like talking to those women focus groups and sort of building those relationships from there.
Fantastic. So much great information. Thank you for sharing with us today, Emily. And we will see you later for the Q&A portion.
Sweet.
So right now we're going to move to Jessica Willis from Pocket Nest, which provides comprehensive financial planning to Gen X and millennials. They license their technology to financial institutions to allow them to more efficiently serve the next gen of consumers. So Jessica, I need you to turn your camera on.
I am on, Laura.
Oh, I hear you. Well, do you want to just start and we'll see if we can get you to pop up whenever we can make technology work for us? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, sure. There it goes. How are you?
Yay. Okay, well, welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. So you have some great experience to share with us because you came from corporate America, had a lot of corporate America experience, but then made the move to startups, which was a whole new world for you. So tell us, what's the most important thing you learned upon entering the startup world?
Yeah, I mean, the high level awesome thing is you get to wear as many hoodies and jeans and yoga pants as you want, although all of us are doing that these days. The real answer for me was it took me some time to kind of navigate what the startup, to navigate that there even was a startup ecosystem. The way I saw it being in the corporate world was, okay, starting my own company was going to be starting my own small corporation, just like the corporate world. And what I quickly realized was that that's not the case. It feels like a very different, it's a very different world, even beyond the hoodies and yoga pants. I learned that there is this, what you'll keep hearing is ecosystem. There is a startup ecosystem. If you're not in it, it takes some time to understand what it is. But what I learned pretty early on was finding that ecosystem was just so important and so helpful for me. So finding my community, and the way I did that was through a couple pre-accelerators that I had joined. The first was G-Beta Detroit, which is the pre-accelerator for Generator based in the Midwest, and then starting to spend a lot of time over at Bamboo and Ann Arbor Spark and these other little startup ecosystem communities.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit more about that pre-accelerator program and how it helped you, what you took away from it with?
Yeah, so the pre-accelerators are great because they really are kind of the first the first baby step into that startup ecosystem. And being in Southeast Michigan, I should say Michigan as a whole, we're really lucky because we do have a really strong startup ecosystem, and we do have quite a few really great strong pre-accelerators. So the ones I went through were, as I mentioned, GBeta Detroit, Ann Arbor Spark, and then Startup Boost Detroit too. And there's a couple things I got out of that. One was kind of the again, that community. So meeting everybody, all the other panelists who are on this call, just starting to find that community where, as Emily said, her advice is to talk to other founders. It's hard and it's kind of lonely to start a startup when you don't know what to expect. So finding the people, finding the community, and kind of the soft side of all of that was really helpful. And then the other thing that was really helpful for me from the pre-accelerators were these the tangible assets of things that I didn't realize at the time I would continue to need for the next couple of years. So through GBeta Detroit, we created executive summaries, which is just a 2-pager on everything about your business, and what seemed at the time like sort of a writing your resume exercise. What I didn't realize was each of those pieces of that executive summary would then become, part of my pitch and part of my very consistent messaging throughout the years later. We also created decks, which anybody who has a startup knows you need many of those, and you're constantly working on that. And then doing a live pitch. So for the first pre-accelerator I went through, we had to stand on stage and give a pitch. And Kim, maybe you can speak to this when you come on the call, but the first time you go to pitch in front of an audience is the worst. You're thinking, that's it, I don't need to do this. I'm gonna just walk out the door. I don't need to build a company. This is way too nerve-wracking. And then, oh my goodness, you get on stage and you black out and you pitch, and it's actually incredibly fun. But being challenged by those pre-accelerators in the beginning to learn how to do that was great. That was actually my favorite thing about Startup Boost Detroit is we got together every week for 12 weeks. And the first half of every session was pitch. So they'd put each of us kind of on, mini stage, and we had to pitch. And each week we had to change our pitch up. They would say, okay, this week we want you to do a 2-minute. Next week is 30 seconds. The next week, with slides or without slides. So I think those pre-accelerators really taught how to be malleable and work with the situation.
Great. And just because people might be wondering, how much do pre-accelerator programs usually cost?
I'm sure there are plenty out there that cost money. I did not do any of those. There are some amazing free pre-accelerators out there, and they're, the 3 I have listed here. And if they're not free, sometimes they offer a scholarship. So you can also ask if you don't have the money to participate, which is usually, you can say, do you have a scholarship? And if they're dedicated to the startup ecosystem, they usually get some state funding to be able to grant those scholarships. So the ones I participated in they didn't take any equity, they didn't take any ownership of the company, they didn't charge us, and they were run by people who are obsessed with the startup world in Michigan.
I think we'll be talking to a few of those later.
I think so too.
So what other nuggets of knowledge do you have to share with us, Jessica? Because you have so much experience, you've kind of already been through it. What do you want to tell the people coming up after you?
Yeah, well, there's a giveaway here on the screen, but there were a couple things I learned. Listen to advice. So I think it's really hard sometimes because we're, as founders, I think, especially in the early years, all you're doing is you're out there asking for mentorship, asking for advice, asking for thoughts. Sometimes it's really hard to take that, and sometimes it's really hard to process that. So my recommendation to all founders is you're going to get a ton of advice coming at you, again, especially in those early days. Listen to it. No one knows your business better than you. So that doesn't mean you have to follow all of that advice, but be open-minded, try to turn off that. I think as founders, because we are so confident in what we're doing and we are visionary, we know we know the business we're running is right, but you sometimes have to turn down that I say arrogance a little bit to let that advice in. And again, that doesn't mean you have to follow it, but listen and process it. And the other piece is get a thick skin. Laura, I love that you put this on here.
I love this quote.
I like to be liked. I think many people do. And that's probably even like, you know, I don't know what the next extreme is. I probably love to be liked. I didn't know how much I would hear no. And if I knew I was going to hear this much no years ago, there's no way I would have done this. But your skin gets so thick because if you're trying to raise capital, you know, 90% of the answers are no. And God, it's probably even higher. But there's going to be people out there that don't get what you're doing. There's going to be people out there that don't like you, that don't like what you're doing. It's fine. It's totally fine, because all you really need to do is find your champions, find your community. So get the thickest skin you possibly can, because you need it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica, and I look forward to seeing you at the Q&A portion.
Thanks, Laura.
So next up, we have Kim Gomez from Mi Padrino. Mi Padrino is a unique crowd gifting platform designed specifically for Latin Americans and their families. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, thanks.
Oh, thanks for being here. So you, my friend, are the champion of the pitch. We know it, own it. You've got a wall full of pitch check competition on your office. So I'm going to ask you to share with our audience, how do you polish that pitch? How do you become a pitch champion?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very competitive, so maybe that helps. I don't get into anything I can't win, and so when there's a pitch competition, I want the check. And yeah, I've raised over $2.5 million now for our startup via, I swear it's because of the pitch. And it's really simple. I've kind of come up with just some simple rules or simple things that you can follow. You know, first and foremost, be yourself. I've heard over and over that the investors are investing in you, the founder. There's a million great ideas. There's not a million founders that can actually execute on those ideas. So they're investing in you as the founder. So you're gonna work right alongside these investors. So just make sure you be yourself first. But every pitch you want to practice. So I know I talked a little bit about this with you, Laura, but like, for example, the biggest pitch that I, in the early days, was for Accelerate Michigan. Mind you, there was like rocket scientists and all these like crazy technologies. And here's Kim with her party planning app. And I thought, there's no way in hell I'm gonna get anything. And so, but I told my son, Max, I'm a mother of 5 and he's my second. And I said, buddy, I need to practice this pitch. I'm normally used to doing a 10-minute pitch. I need to break it down to a 5-minute pitch. And so he would like time me with a buzzer. And I honestly thought, if I can get my middle schooler to pay attention for 5 minutes, not buzz me out, not beg to leave, and actually think I'm like cool at the end, like, oh, Mom, you're so smart, or like, wow, we're gonna be like rich one day. If I could make my middle schooler like give me all his Monopoly money, then I was like, I can get these investors. So I went and pitched at Accelerate Michigan, totally thought I was out of my league. We had not had any revenue for the company. We had just launched and just started to grow, and I ended up winning $100,000 at that event. And honestly, my mentor, my Maxie, I called him. He was the first person I called when I won. I was like, buddy, we did it. But, you know, going into another thing is like, when I went to Accelerate Michigan, I realized that there was this whole audience of people there. And I wanted to like get the People's Choice Award, and I didn't know who the investors were. But not necessarily for like the big competitions, but even when you're just talking to individual investors, you want to know who you're talking to. So for example, I've pitched to Michigan investors, which typically in like the angel groups, they're all men, unfortunately, and they're normally white men, which is fine, but they normally have never been to a Hispanic celebration, they don't speak Spanish, and they're probably not used to seeing a lot of female founders pitch. And so you have to understand who your audience is. But then when I went to Houston and pitched in Houston, a lot of the investors there had been to a quinceañera, or they understand how big the opportunity is. And so it's just knowing that audience. And then, and with that, it goes to like, your investors are going to do their due diligence on you as a company. But these people, you're like getting into bed with if you take their money. So you want to make sure you do just as much due diligence on that investor. And like Jessica said, you're going to do hundreds of pitches. And so don't waste your time on the investors that you don't want to get in bed with, girl. Like, go on to the ones that you actually want to marry. And so I'm serious, like, don't waste your time. Either you'll see right on their website that they don't invest in your type of company, you're not at the right stage, maybe you're not in the right area, maybe they only invest in Austin, Texas. And so don't fly to Austin to pitch to this investor when he's obviously not going to invest in you. And then honestly, the biggest thing is simple message. I've seen so many pitches out there from other companies where I'm like, what did I just watch? Like, or why are there so many words on their slide? Like, simplify it, simple words. Again, if you can make the middle schooler pay attention to you, it's simple words because you're talking to this vast audience, and just keep the message really simple and the opportunity, make it really big. So, what else?
Well, I know one thing that you have is this awesome go-to line that I'd like you to share with our audience and talk a little bit about why you have this line and why you need to use it sometimes.
Oh yeah, so part of your pitch, whether it's in person or via like a one-on-one in person, or it's like via competition, is that there's always going to be a section or time for questions. So in an event, it's a time, like you have 10 minutes for Q&A. So you want to make sure that you get out of the hole quickly for questions that you don't want to answer, but you also don't want to get into a hole during the Q&A via a one-on-one, because then it's going to consume the whole rest of your conversation talking about stuff that you can't answer. And so it's all about, my go-to line is, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, but this is how I'm going to get there. And so when I was when I just had the idea for Meet by the Needle, and they're like, well, how are you going to monetize the platform? And how are you going to, let's just stick with that. How are you going to monetize the platform? This is what I know. The quinceañera industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry here in the US. The average quinceañera is $20,000. I know that there is a huge opportunity. What I don't know is exactly how we're going to monetize it. But with the money that you're going to give me to invest, is I'm going to hire the team that's going to do the research, and we're going to figure this out. And so like, oh, okay. Instead of me going, well, we thought about this, and we could do this. No, straight answer. This is what I know. This is what I don't know, and this is how I'm going to get there. And normally how I get there is, when you give me your money, this is how I'm going to figure it out. So, yeah, so that's kind of my go-to phrase, and I use it literally every time I pitch.
I love it. You are a force of nature. And you have so much good advice to give. You have figured out, I think, so many ways to not only do things really well, but to do them really efficiently, which I think it's so important for everybody, but really as a woman juggling so many things, efficiency is so important. So share your wisdom, because you have a lot of good things that you have figured out for the rest of us.
Yeah, as a female founder, we don't have time. And I mean, I feel like I'm at the complete extreme. I am the founder of a founder of a tech company, and I'm a non-technical founder. I'm married to a very handsome Mexican man who likes to have warm dinners with his family. I have 5 beautiful children that play sports. And so it's like, I need shit to be on time, and I need to do it efficiently and effectively. And so I have figured out some things, because I needed to figure them out to make sure that I could stay sane and alive and here. So first thing is having 3 decks. So that's kind of like, I think everybody knows that. Well, you learn that, but you don't just have 1 deck, you have 3. So I have a presentation deck. It'll have, because you'll do like competitions, let's just talk about that. Sometimes you'll go and present to a group and you'll have 5 minutes. Sometimes you'll have 10 minutes. Sometimes you'll only have 2 minutes. So I create a deck that has lots of slides. And then for whatever presentation I'm doing, I either pull some, cut some parts out. So you have that presentation deck. And with that, you want to make sure that there is little to no text. I swear by that. Like, if you are going to use text, use bullet point words. Do not write out sentences. Use icons. Icons speak a million words. And then you're going to have your teaser deck. So that's a deck that you might ask someone like, hey, Laura, I want an intro to so-and-so. Could you share this blurb, and here's this deck. So it's not giving them all your secret sauce, but it's getting them really excited about wanting to talk to you. Because you don't want to just give anyone your deck, but at the same time, once it's out in the world, really anybody can probably find it. And so, but that intro deck is just short and sweet. Mine is, I think 7 slides long. I throw on some big flashy logos and the total addressable market and a little bit about my team. And so that just kind of gets them excited for like the next step. But then you also then have the full email deck. So for me anyway, let's say you make an intro, they're interested, we set up a time to talk. Before that meeting, I'm like, hey, before we meet, I want to just give you our full deck ahead of time so you can review it. If you have any questions, come to the meeting with questions. And yeah, so that deck is like 20 slides long, and then it has like an appendix of other random stuff that's very important to some investors and not important to others. So I leave that at the end. But you're always going to have those 3 decks. And with that, I put my decks in Google Slides. So Google Slides is free, and it's really great because I attach the link in emails. And so anytime, let's say I talked to an investor last year, and maybe he sees me on LinkedIn, he's like, oh yeah, I remember that girl, and he pulls up my email. If he clicks on my deck, he will see the most updated version of the Google deck because the link always stays the same, but I can change in and out the slides. So instead of sending a PDF or a PowerPoint, Google Slides, so that anyone who has access to that link will see the most updated version of the deck. Also, when I'm sending those emails, there's lots of opportunities for people to book on your calendar. There's like Calendarly. I use HubSpot, but always let me know a good time that works for you. Or if it's easier, feel free to pick a time on my calendar here, because you just want to make it easy for them. You just don't want to go back and forth with your calendars unless they want to do that. You always give them an opportunity. I feel like it works to have them access your calendar and just book a time. I send quarterly investor updates to my current investors, but then I also pull, again, I want to send this now as a teaser to potential investors that I have on my potential investor list. So I pull out some of maybe the revenue numbers and just talk about either the growth or some highlights. I send the full version to my investors. I strip it of some important details, but then send it as a teaser to potential investors. And then with that, I always have an ask, whether it's to my investors or current investors. Hey, I know you might not want to invest right now, but do you have an intro to the CMO of Univision or what have you? I always have an ask on those. And then I've actually started doing this because I heard about it. I don't know if I was on a panel or I don't know what it was from, but pinging investors with oh, I thought of you when I saw this article. And I just did this a couple weeks ago to my potential investor list because it was talking about how big the Hispanic market was and how it's growing so fast. And I'm like, I'm gonna send this just to see if I can start conversations again. And 90% of those potential investors reached out wow, this was so interesting, or oh, I'm so glad to see this in my inbox. And it wasn't hey, I'm asking you for money, or hey, here's an update on my company. It was here's something interesting. I thought of you and thought that you might want to read it. And I guess my last thing is I've been told I'm a hustler. That I want, I told you, I'm very competitive, but I feel that way with every aspect of my life. So I want to talk to someone, I want an intro somewhere, I want to meet that investor. So you really have to swallow your pride sometimes because you will feel like a stalker or I don't know, but as long as you try not to make it creepy, I'm always I'm sorry, I just really, admire the work that you've done and I can learn so much from you. As long as you're genuine, with your stalkerness, I guess that's kind of a bit of advice. Sorry, I know I'm on a rampage there.
All right, thank you so much, Kim. So much great knowledge. Cannot wait to see you again at the end of the webcast for the Q&A. See you later. So next up we have Monica Wheat. She is joining us from Venture Catalyst, an ecosystem development group focused on programming, funding, strategy, and business development for entrepreneurs. Hi, Monica.
Hi, how are you?
Great. So much information being shared today. I love it, and I love what you bring to the table. So our audience today is, primarily women. So what are you seeing in your line of profession that you want these women to know?
Well, a couple things. I always talk about my background. I started out way back when I was in corporate and doing angel stuff, and then more focused on ecosystem development, now more into the venture capital side. But one of the things that I find that with with the female population of female founders that I work with is just really not understanding or not being able to gauge themselves on whether they are or their company is fit to pursue an investor or to pursue venture capital as a form of scaling and developing their company. So that's definitely the first thing, is just that assessment. And I think that assessment, a lot of women just don't have the information. They're just not in the conversations. And as Emily alluded to with some of the data and some of the resources that she was mentioning, we are just not represented in those conversations. So that information is just not spread out and equitably shared. But one of the things, the first things is that this is a game of risk. And ideally, you want to have someone who's willing to take that risk with you, but also you want to have somebody who knows that taking a risk in your company not only will give them their investment back, but will give them a profit on their investment. So there's a lot of different pieces with that, but that's how you know whether your path is better spent on pure venture or whether your path is better spent doing traditional funding with maybe banking, or your path is spent, which I've seen a lot of women do very successfully, where they've done whole rounds and strategies around pitching and pitch competitions and things like that as the way to fund their businesses. But this is a game of risk, and ideally you want someone, you want to have all the markers, kind of like Kim was talking about, that make people want to take that risk with you, and they have enough information at their fingers in order to do that. The other part of it is that you want to be willing to chase this down. And I think she mentioned, like, a couple of Kim and Jessica were talking about not being a stalker, but you have to have that extra oomph in your interactions with folks. Obviously things are different now that we're in a pandemic, but when the world was live and you were interacting with people, it's one of those things where the folks who the squeaky wheel gets all the oil, or whatever they call it. That's exactly how you get yourself front and center. The folks who I know who have been very successful in raising rounds and funding their companies and getting their word out and getting good partners are the ones who are going to come, and introduce themselves, even if they're scared, even if they don't, they'll have a plan, they'll have researched you, they're coming to an event, they know who's going to be at the event, and they're looking for it, but they're chasing it down. They're not just waiting for the information to kind of be applied to them. The other thing, especially with women founders that I see, like I work with Techstars globally, which is more general mainstream, but definitely they have diversity and inclusiveness as their part of their DNA. But when I do programs that are focused on women or underrepresented groups, one of the things that I'll see is that the broader audience, which is younger, male, and tends to be not as diverse, they will go up to a Mark Cuban or whoever our keynote speaker is, and they will pitch him with, it's so funny, I have one here, they will pitch him with just like some words on the back of a napkin as, this is my idea, and I just had to meet you, and I'm so excited to meet you, and da da da. And sometimes those aren't appropriate, but for the most times, they're likely to get something from that interaction that makes it value added. Whereas most of the females and most of the underrepresented founders that I work with, they will wait to be perfect. They will have a PhD, they'll have ran, corporate boards and teams for 10, 15 years, ran two or three whole teams of folks. They'll wait till all of that is stacked up perfectly and tied with a bow before they will approach, before they will pitch, before they will apply to an accelerator, before they will even see if venture capital is for them. They're jumping in, they're jumping in too late. And so not waiting until everything is perfect is super, super key. And then the last part I think is really, that needs to be said and reiterated, is if you're waiting till you're at the 100% mark, it will slow you down, and it will slow down the ability for you to return capital. So that 100% mark of, okay, they always say that when you launch your business, you should be ashamed of it, because that's very true. Because if you wait until it's so perfect that everything is going well, then you've probably waited too late. You probably should have put some feelers out there and done some testing with customers and got that feedback, like Jessica was talking about earlier on, where they tell you no, where they actually poke holes at the things that you weren't sure of. If you wait until you get to the end of the game before you start going out there and pitching it and putting it out there, you're gonna lose your traction. You're gonna lose your ability to get the broader return for both yourselves and your teams, and it's also going to put you behind the competition, because the competition is going to put together MVP in a weekend and then start testing it the next week. So those are the things that make entrepreneurs, whether they be tech focused or whether they be, services or more traditionally business based, those are the differences between those who are going to get these kind of what people think are hidden, but just really are just a language and a culture of founders in the ecosystem. And that's broader than Detroit. This is the general startup ecosystem. Those are some of the things that are the beginnings of where the information isn't shared as broadly. And then the confidence to be in those rooms just isn't known and isn't part of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to talk about that conversation and that confidence of being able to talk the talk.
Yeah.
And that I know is something that you've seen out there with, so how can women get more comfortable with being able to talk venture?
So I would say the first thing is events like this. Usually these events are live, but even there was always virtual events and things like this where you can interact in an unintimidating manner with folks who are talking about investing, about their companies, about what they've done. That's the value of most of these programs and events, especially when they come from good partners who are vetting it and vetting the people who are sharing information. But the first thing is that when you're in these kind of meetings, if you hear words that people are using, write them all down. You know, like if you hear things that don't make sense, all those things, write them all down. And then most everything is available for free that you can research after the fact. And there's a couple of books we'll talk about, but that's the first part. Is the language of venture is really key, and people can very quickly tell. And this is whether you're going pure investment or you're going like in a non-dilutive, which means you're not looking to give away equity, you're just looking for grants and things like that to fund your business. No matter which route you're taking, people know innately whether what level you're at in the ecosystem by the way that you talk and the way that you talk about your business and the milestones that it's achieved or how your business has grown. So get comfortable with it. Ask questions. Maybe take that list of 10 questions. If you can't research them on your own, you can't find out things that make sense, then you might sit down and do the free office hours. That's the usage of a free office hours or something like that to start that so that you're comfortable. The next part is then the more that you use it, the more confident you will definitely become. So the using it is where you look at some of these, when you look at some of these, small group chats or networking groups or things like that, where there are other people who are at your level, maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below, who are all learning together. But it's a more comfortable environment to get in the mix before you go and present yourself to an investor or present yourself to a board who's making a decision about a grant or something like that. Having those conversations and being a part of those small groups and different women's networking groups, and the Detroit area has a ton of them. The more you use it, then you'll be comfortable asking those questions and being in the room and being front and center and chasing after the big investor who's the keynote. You'll be more comfortable to actually do that if you feel like that you can hold a conversation with them. The terms are key. Asking questions are key. I always tell folks to ask questions and to not just assume when I say equity, when I say venture, or when I say venture capital, or when I say any of these different terms that make up the ecosystem. I always make folks clarify, unless they're like some really high up person. I make folks clarify because I work ecosystem to ecosystem, and the norms of how what people think is a normal rate of return or normal investment percentage or all those things, they're different in each market, and they're different in each city, and they're different in each event. And so I always make people clarify what we're talking about and what we think the average is. And I ask questions. And I think the more that we are comfortable asking questions and having the wrong answer, the more informed you'll be and the more confident you'll be in a lot of these conversations. And that's what I mean by clarifying the norm. The norm is not the same in each locale. Even if it's different industries, whether it's tech or non-tech, or even if it's different types of funding, or even if it's different stages of funding, the norms change. Even if you're having the same type of conversation in a different city or that's hosted by a different group, what people are talking about and how they talk about it might be different. So the more you clarify, not only is that you're really understanding one another, but that's making sure that you're finding the fit of the tribe. I always say find your tribe, of the tribe where you're at. Everyone will know that, hey, this is what we mean when we say a safe note. Because that's not a safe note is not the same thing in all markets. It's just not. And so the more that people clarify these things, the better conversations that you'll have.
Good. You just briefly touched on it, and I wanted to go back to it. I know there's not one secret factor, but there is the power of research. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about research? And the slide calls out a couple books that I know you recommend specifically.
Absolutely. The number 1 and 2 books that I always recommend to folks are Venture Deals. It's Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist. Brad Feld, who helped co-found Techstars, and Jason Mendelson, who's been a long-time part of the Techstars family, but also is a Detroit native. He's come here and helped us multiple times with different initiatives. This is like the gold standard. This is what most accelerators nationwide use. And then the same thing with the business of venture capital. The business of venture capital was super important to me because it allowed me, especially early on, to test my knowledge of terms. And I even go back sometimes and read it just to see if it's changed now that I'm at this level or this level, to see if it makes different sense, the way that different, and my cat's meowing, sorry, to see if the terminology is different on the business cases and how I'm interpreting that data. But the business venture capital is really giving you the thought of, the broader ecosystem of, most folks don't realize that of all businesses, less than 5% actually get venture capital. That's all businesses. That's not the traditional way that businesses are funded. And so when you start there, that starts to help you understand the landscape. And the business of venture capital kind of broke a lot of that down, and venture as an asset class and all that kind of stuff. But in general, knowledge saves time. Knowledge makes you feel like you can have any conversation in any room. And then there are tons and tons and tons of blogs and podcasts and just different spaces and places, all dependent upon your stage and what type of company you're building. And a lot of them aren't really, there's a lot that are focused on, investors and angel investors and VCs and things like that. But there are also a ton of folks who are really just about funding and about operating a sustainable business and about growing business. And the more that you're finding those good places to get that information, the better off you are.
Great. I wanted to touch really briefly, we're getting super tight on time, but it seems important to touch at least on the pandemic and how you're seeing that affecting things.
So definitely Venture Catalyst is the ecosystem development group, and that's what we do, is we help our companies, in general with strategy, in general with all those things. But what I've been telling everyone is that the number one and the easiest way to go about this is to find your point in time right now and to think about starting your business as if you were starting it right now. Because that's the only thing that's going to matter. Trying to hold off and wait for 2019 conditions to reset themselves could be years from now. To try to hold off and wait for the way that you used to attract customers and the way that you used to attract partners could be several years from now. To hold off and wait for the way that you used to do funding and the way that your product worked and what your customers thought, all those things have had the ability to change during the pandemic. So the number one piece of advice that I've been telling folks is that think of your business as if you had to start it right now. That's the business that you're working on right now. All the rest of it honestly doesn't really matter.
Great. Thank you for so much great information, Monica. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you soon for the Q&A.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our final guest today is Nadia Abanasser from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Hi, Nadia. Can you please tell us what programs the MEDC funds and a little bit about what they do?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me. Just a brief overview is we get funding through the MSF, the Michigan Strategic Fund Board, to basically provide services for entrepreneurs statewide. One of the programs that is more localized that we fund is the Gateway representative through the Smart Zones. So we have 21 Smart Zones across the state, 3 in the UP and the rest in the Lower Peninsula. But basically what they do is they provide a local front door for a tech entrepreneur so that they don't have to travel across the state to get services. So like I said, we fund the Gateway representative, and they're responsible for welcoming the tech startup or entrepreneur, introducing them to the local ecosystem, providing an overview of the statewide programs they'd be eligible for. They do give them some business help, business plan, strategy guidance, and we'll also help with fundraising efforts. The big thing though is that they do introduce them to the statewide service providers that we also fund through the MSF and to our funding programs. So 2 of the statewide service providers that we fund heavily is the SBDC tech team. And the tech team is made up of 10 tech advisors who all have deep knowledge in commercialization of technology. A lot of them have worked in startups and in the industry, and basically they provide free consulting to these companies to help them develop their pitches for investors, commercialization plans, road mapping, do customer discovery. So they have a long list of services that they can provide and help entrepreneurs with. The other statewide service provider is BBC EDC, and they run the Michigan SBIR STTR training program. So they provide free webinars on how to write a proposal for an SBIR or STTR to the numerous federal agencies, and they all have their own rules. They used to do some of this in person, but we're now in a pandemic, so it's all webinars, and the webinars are free to Michigan-based tech companies. And they will also provide one-on-one services to companies, helping them with all aspects of the grant writing.
Great.
For a small fee.
And what if you're in a university setting? I know
Yes, yeah, we have some funding. A good portion of our funding does go to help commercialize technology out of the universities. We always recommend that university researchers start with their tech transfer office. We have 2 funding programs, the Proof of Concept Fund, which is very, very early stage, trying to figure out if there's anything there to commercialize. And then we do have a mentor network through the Tech Transfer Talent Network. And then the biggest program is the Michigan Translational and Commercialization Program, MTRAC. There are 5 statewide hubs in different technology areas: advanced materials, advanced transportation, life sciences, advanced computing, and ag bio. So all of the 15 public universities and nonprofit hospital system nonprofit research institutes are eligible. There's matching funds involved, and there's an oversight committee. They get mentorship. Funding is milestone based, and the goal is to get the technology out of the university into something that could actually be used in real life.
Great. So let's quickly touch on the different services that the MEDC offers. And I just want to point out to our audience that the website, the link is available right here, and that will take you right to the page that has all these listed and more detail about them too. So can you touch on this a little bit and tell our audience a little bit about what's out there for them possibly?
Sure. The first one I'll talk about is the Business Accelerator Fund. That is kind of like the very first funding a company could get access to. So the local Smart Zone Accelerator would apply for funding on behalf of the company for services that the local accelerator or incubator can't provide. So they would get, it's a competitive process, they could get up to $50,000 for services. Most of the awards are typically between 5 and 15 though. And these services, things like some prototyping, some legal work, it could be marketing. So it would provide funding to a third party to give the services to the startup. The Emerging Technologies Fund is just a matching fund program for the SBIR STTR program. It's $25,000 for phase 1 and $125,000 for phase 2. All a company really needs to do is ask for the money before they submit their SBIR application. And if they win the award, they will get the funding. The First Capital Fund is really the first funding that is an investment into the company. It's run by IG Ventures out of Detroit. This fund can go up to $250,000, though the typical award is below $100,000. It's milestone based, and the funding is given out in tranches. The key is this one does not require a matching dollars, so it is really meant for earlier stage companies, and the goal is to get them to a point where they are commercializing technology that can then help them get to the next stage of funding and raise additional funding elsewhere. And our last funding program is the Pre-Seed Fund 3. That is run through the Michigan State Foundation and Michigan Rise. That goes up to $250,000, does require an external match, and it is also a milestone based, and the funding is tranched out based on those milestones. And it's for a little bit later stage. Obviously, if we're requiring an external one-to-one match, you should be able to raise some angel funding or the like from somewhere else. And again, the end goal is either a commercialized product where you can survive off of revenues if you're really lucky, or to get you to the point where it's you've got a better chance at raising a VC round based on the results of where your technology is.
Great. Wow, so many good questions coming in. I'd like to invite all the panelists to get back on, and we'll try to get through as many of these questions as we can. Actually, the first question is going to be for you, Nadia, and I think it's, is the MEDC Smart Zones available for tech companies, only available for tech companies?
The funding that we give them through the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Initiative is for tech companies. However, the majority of the smart zones also support non-tech companies. So for instance, TechTown has a huge portion of the work that they do that is focused on non-tech companies, as well as all the others. I mean, nobody's going to turn you away if you come in the door. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Monica, one of the questions was for you. You mentioned free office hours, and the person asked, could you give a little more detail about that? Where do you find these free office hours?
They're pretty much,
Kimberly not.
yeah, they're pretty much almost every of the major accelerators. I know TechTown has some, Google has had some, the University of Michigan, Zell Lurie has some, we've had a series of them with Bamboo. We've had them, and I also would say, even if it doesn't, the program isn't formally saying free office hours, there are usually informal networking before most of the pitch competitions and most of the larger scale initiatives. That's where you would take advantage, and you can also just reach out and say, can I meet with you? Things like that. Those all tend to work.
Right. Let's see, my questions moved on me, so I have to shift a little bit here. What's the best way to obtain funding to test your product or service once you've incorporated and running that test confidentially? What's the best way to obtain funding to test your product or service?
Without giving away your ideas.
Honestly, that's part of the risk of this, is that you're really not going to be able to, you can do closed betas and things like that, where you have a small circle of folks who are testing software, things like that. But for the most part, the risk and where you're going to get the results is if you put stuff out to the public. I always tell my folks that if you are the person who's meant to take this idea to scale, you are that person. And there's just the risk in general of being in this market is about putting it out there. But to obtain funding for the testing phase, there are a couple of different programs. I think Lawrence Tech has one that's like look for programs that have product market fit or product development programs. Lawrence Tech has one. There's a couple of them, others that have little grants and things like that to help you at that phase. But to do it in a closed method, you're likely not going to get as broad or the audience or the targeted audience that you're looking for.
Well, actually, the Business Accelerator Fund that I talked about will fund testing.
Oh, cool.
And so that's one source of funding. I know like LTU will actually use Business Accelerator funds to run testing, and there are a variety of different service providers who do it as well. So, and that's one source of funding. As far as keeping it confidential, you sign contracts, and beyond that, there's really nothing you can do. I mean, if they're going to violate an NDA, then you can try and sue them.
Great. Oh, Kim, I think
You're on mute.
Wait, can we just pause? I'm so excited about, like, I was like on mute like this whole time being like, yeah, that's right. Like, everyone's so good.
There has been so much great information shared on this webcast today. I was also doing that inside, Emily.
Yeah.
Oh, we
So
lost
let's
him.
do some more questions because there are so many questions and we're so short on time now. I am 1.5 years into business, but most VCs want 3 years. What is the best way to suggest getting funds at my stage?
So
Benefits for I'm not even 3 years in right now. I raised over $1 million a year in. So it's all about, even with the last question, what I was trying to say is that you don't need to even do a beta test to run money. Show that you have a potential solution to a problem and a market size, and you'll be able to raise funding as long as you can give a great pitch and you can get people on board. You don't actually have to go and like make the product or even have a beta test group. Again, I guess that kind of answers both questions, but no, you don't need, I mean, it's actually probably better that you're a year and a half in. You can show all the lessons you've learned. You can use my like whole line about what you know and what you don't know. Like you've learned all of this stuff in a year and a half. That's more time than most startups or even in business. So,
Yeah, and I think that's what Monica was addressing too. If you wait until everything's perfect with a bow on it, you've waited too long.
Yeah.
So,
Depends what stage the investor is that you're talking to. Like if you're talking to an angel investor, it's like maybe this person's gotten this feedback from someone that's a little bit later stage and it's like, well, we'd like to have seen you achieve these couple milestones before we would invest. But I think if you go a little bit earlier stage angel investor, pre-seed investor, then I think that's where it's like slightly different.
I was going to concur because the question said approaching a VC, and at 1.5 years in, you likely wouldn't be tapping VCs. There would be different types of funding you'd be looking at.
okay. So what funding is available for food and beverage startups?
there's tons of funding. So prior to Meet by the Nino, I made a living selling tacos. So I know lots about, I mean, literally 17 years slinging tacos is what I did. And we created a small, like, I say chain of restaurants. But I always knew I wanted to do something bigger and better. So there's lots of opportunities, whether you go to a bank, you know, because you might have like an actual location where they'll lend on the building itself. So that's pretty easy. You just have to give your tax return. You don't have to give them a business plan. And then there's also, you know, I think, is it with the MEDC that there's like there's like grants or loans or something. There's all kinds of random things to where you live. Like, so for example, in Jackson, where I'm at, you might have to put 20% down on the loan with the bank, but you can go to the local academic group and they will maybe bridge you, give you that 20%. So then you don't have to bring any money to like closing or to start. But there's lots of things. I mean, you could do a Kickstarter. You could do, I mean, like pre-orders. You could do all kinds of things for the food and beverage industry.
I always direct folks to DeVita Davidson and the Food Lab team. They've always had a long ton of programs. And then I know that the Eastern Market has like the several programs that have like cooperative things like Kim was talking about, where you can, you know, have sort of shared kitchens, have it funded, you know, open marketplaces, things like that make it easier to produce your product while you're building your business.
I think we have time for one last question. What's the best way to find networking accelerator events, especially in this world?
I think you can.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I think you can start. Yeah, I think you can start by signing up for newsletters, and there's probably just a handful in Southeast Michigan that once you get onto one list, you'll naturally find the others to get onto. So Ann Arbor, Spark, Bamboo, Venture Catalyst. I mean, everybody on this panel, I think, probably has a subscribe here on their websites, with the exception of me and Kim, because we're founders. But I think, you know, once you get onto one or two email lists, you get in the community fast.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I just got an email from Spark. Well, you probably all got it, but it had like everything that you should be doing in the next like 3 months. So
Yep.
like, I guess this is the only thing I need to know. So yeah, just find one, or that goes back to like getting out of your comfort zone and you want to be on that list, maybe call Spark and talk to them and build a relationship and say, hey, next time you know of something, let me know. Hey, next time you know about something in manufacturing, or know about something in the food industry, hey, guess what? That's what I'm trying to get into. Let them know who you are. And then the next time somebody's like, oh yeah, that crazy Kim girl from Jackson, let's throw over this stuff. So
Yeah.
And follow Emily on LinkedIn. She has everything.
Yeah, I would say like that, like getting in those groups like Detroit Women's Leadership Network. I know like Monica and I regularly post if we're like hosting an event or like have an event that we think is really cool, we'll post in there, or like just following people on LinkedIn and things like that. I think it's like if you follow people on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, like people regularly post these and you just can't, like, you almost want to be like mute people after a while.
no, but if you're on LinkedIn, actually write a question like, hey, I'm looking for this. Please add me to this. And you'll get just flooded with resources.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially DWLN, they are so helpful. Best reference group I think I've been a part of in Detroit. Detroit Women's Leadership Network. Every time I put a question in there, like it's just a mass amount of folks who respond with just options. Danielle North and the team have done a really good job there.
Yeah, my goodness.
Well, I hate to say it, we have run out of time. Before we go, I do want to share that an audience member sent not a question in, but this comment. It is so hopeful to see such smart, powerful, successful women. Thank you for your time. I can't think of a better way to end it, except for thanking all of you for your time and thanking the Michigan Economic Development Corporation for sponsoring this today. Thank you, everybody. Total inspiration, and everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
This was great, guys.
It was. Thank you, Monica.
Oh, nice.